before I go on, I was taking a cruise down memory lane today, and I keep some of the things that I was working with when I was in IT, and I wanted to show you this. You may never have seen one before, but this is a double-sided 8-inch floppy disk drive. This is what we used back in the 70s and the 80s to transfer software back to do backups. You actually used to be able to have machines that had two 8-inch floppy disks, and you would actually flip them back and forth as one was finishing copied, it would copy to the next drive, and you just take it and stack like 20 and 30 disks at a time. So it's kind of interesting. This is a little printout of my programs. And this was RPG I was programming on an IBM. And 1993, so 30 years ago, I was programming this. I was moving to another kind of profession. I was 37 and I needed some extra stuff. So this is 1 meg. Okay. Then we got to the 3.5-inch floppies in the 90s, and these were 1.44 meg, and these were all also kind of cool because these also had a protective sleeve over the cover. All right. So whereas the magnetic media on this was vulnerable, this was not, and it came in a hard case and you could slip it in your pocket. Okay. So what made me think of this, so it says two double high density disks, that's 1.44 megs formatted. It was 2 megs unformatted. But what was making me think of it is this is the card that has all of the maps for my car, and I'm about to upgrade this to the newest maps. All right. This is 1,000 gigabytes. No, this is 500 gigabytes. All right. This is a terabyte. Okay. Anybody want to calculate how many of these is in a terabyte? "30 years later, 1 megabyte, 1 terabyte. You know how many of these are in this? Calculate 1 terabyte divided by 1 megabyte.
Like 100 million.
A million. There are a million 8-inch floppies in this 1 terabyte, and there are 500,000 in my little map card. So this is just 30 years. So get them at, well, no, 1980s, this is actually 40 years. But in my lifetime, these are the kinds of things that I've seen as progress. So kind of makes you think about where you're ultimately going to be. Who knows what you're going to see when you're my age? So there's always great expectations. There's great futures out there. So good and bad. All right, enough of philosophy. Okay, so how do we go about paying for our goods? So it's important to understand that, as I've said before, stated over and over again, and certainly it's going to be a test question, is that you start from the buy perspective and you have to justify moving to the make position. You always start at the buy position. We are going to buy channel functions from third parties. We know as marketing channel specialists that every channel function carries a cost. Bonus question 2. Every channel function carries a cost. And if that's true, what we have to do is be realistic and examine what are the costs of buying. So these are the 3 most common ways in which we buy in. And then other variations, especially depending on whether or not you're new in the business and you need a little help. All right. So the first is margin. Let's see if I don't scratch. I don't. Okay. Margin, which is difference between the reseller's price the difference between the reseller's price and the cost of goods sold. The difference between the reseller's price and the cost of goods sold. That is invariably the standard in which the vast majority, easily over 50% of all of those are usually spent. Commission is a fraction on the resale price. You'll find commissions generally also very prevalent in franchising. Franchising as such, they will require like 9% of all sales before you ever basically pay another bill. And so that's what commissions is. And then finally, royalty is a percentage of the reseller's business. Forty percent of what you will be doing will be coming from us. So those are the most popular ways, okay? Now let's also remind ourselves that it depends down the channel structure system, which one you're going to use. But the vast majority, as I've said before, it's usually margins, all right? Usually margins are the way that you pay for these kind of things. The other ones can be kind of elaborate. They also require, as we go down the list, a certain amount more guarantees. You're also generally looking at businesses who are needing some kind of help, and they're willing to give some portion of their business to be able to make it down the line. So what are the other ones? The first one is a lump sum or a flat fee, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's just that. You pay a certain amount down, and then that's it. This is also generally where you find businesses that are struggling and they need to pay for their costs up front or beforehand. The next is what's called a functional discount. So what a functional discount is when a corporation is reimbursed for their expenses. And so in essence, they're being paid for just the costs that are associated with the business itself and no reasonable profit. This is also a way corporations who are at risk and are starting out, who would just need business to be able to start, is a way for them to get through it. Now, the problem with this is that it can create something of a moral hazard, because what it requires you to do is it requires you to provide some form of records inside your department to say whether or not you're being truthful. And the difficulty, of course, is that there's the possibility that you're turning over part of your business to someone else. And so the functional discount is a risk, in whatever way you want to say it. The last is future considerations. And these are the rights to future business. And once again, this is an important step, especially if you're trying to establish yourself. But the problem with that is that the future business may never materialize. Once again, I was taking a trip down memory lane. There was a company called Columbia Data Products that sold PC units or PC compatible ones. They were rated, when I was selling them in 1982, they were rated pretty high. They were called MPCs, multiple processing units, because they could run both Unix or Xenix, but also they could run CP/M and MS-DOS. Anyway, They were trying to live on only 5% margin. And here's one of those difficulties that when you're a follower in industry, and there's plenty of followers that are out there, when you invest too much in your own technology, when the technology changes, you don't have the ability to follow along with it, especially when you're talking about reverse engineering like they did. IBM came out with the XT model, different kinds of situations. They couldn't adapt quickly, filed Chapter 11 in 3 years. And now actually they're a software manufacturing and a backup company. Once again, it's going down memory lane. But this is the difficulty of future consideration. And we did this when I was at Omni Computer Store. And the fact is that it's a grasp for a hope that may never materialize. But why do we do it? Because we do it. We want to roll the dice and make it happen. All right. What also has to be said about these is the shifting of cost goes downstream, the shifting of responsibility goes downstream, but there are distinct advantages of doing it as well. So, why do we do it? There is only one reason to be in business, or there's only one reason to do any investment in any business whatsoever. I want you to burn this in your brain. There's only one reason to make investments in your business. It is to increase your return on investment, ROI. If any of you go into business for yourselves, when you're making choices, you must always put in your mind the most important thing is that do you have a return on your investment? And whether that return is substantial or tangible or intangible, you have to ask that question always. Return on investment is the prior criteria for doing everything, and that's why we start in the buy position. And so I want you to understand what this little formula is. Because this little formula where it says efficiency, this little formula is return on investment. So in the numerator, we have two numbers. One is revenue. Revenue generated by sales. The next is direct costs. Direct costs are any costs, this is tautological because I'm using the same words in the definition, any costs that are directly associated, with the acquisition and production of units, okay? So direct costs, if I make this 1 terabyte thumb drive, I have a certain amount of costs that are associated. It has a steel sleeve on it, has a steel USB connection, plastic inside, and of course, you've got all of the circuitry that goes on the side. Everything that is associated with the direct production of this unit, including the factors on the factory itself, is considered a direct cost. And you see direct costs normally priced out as per unit. And so if this costs me $40, if this costs me $40, then some, let's just say $25 or $30 are directly associated with the production and the use of this particular good, including shipping. Overhead are all of those costs associated with a business, that do not directly associate with production. In other words, these would be costs that you would have to incur regardless of whether you produced one unit or not. So you have the lease on the building. You have the acquisition of office supplies. You have legal expenses. You have power expenses not associated with the production of those goods. You have general and administrative expenses. One of those great catch-all kind of sayings that anything we can't figure out where it's supposed to go, we're going to put it in general administrative, which means general administrative balloons like crazy. But anyway, all of those expenses are overhead. Overhead is usually considered a total dollar cost because you don't separate them from factors of production. So I got $1 million phone bill, say. So the formula goes, revenues minus the direct costs, in essence, is the net effectiveness, or this is the profit, okay, that comes before I pay every other bill. Okay, so that's what net effectiveness is. The overhead is basically all the other costs that we incur. That final number is what's known as efficiency. Yes, I would want you to know this, and I want you to know what each one of these mean. Once again, and I'll state it for the record again, the only reason to be in business or to make decisions is to increase your overall return on investment. So, given this, it's a good start to understand why it is so much better to be able to take your costs and have them associated somewhere else. Quite simply, the advantages are too big. But there are two reasons, however. If I can prove that my revenues go up and my direct costs remain consistent, then yes, I want to vertically integrate. But if I can't increase my return on investment by going to a vertical market, I might have other reasons. One of them is I may not be able to obtain the resources. They may be locked in a strategic way. One of the more smarter things Elon Musk did was to obtain the resources necessary to fuel his electric batteries. And naturally, where you would expect to be, especially with the growth of electric vehicles, lithium has become a pinch. So if I can't obtain the resources, then I don't have the choice to vertically integrate. Well, another is that I might have managerial bounds. If you remember, environmental managerial, these are exactly what those are. The environmental bounds is that I lack the resources. The managerial ones is that I have firm priorities which contribute more to the return on investment, and it exhausts those capabilities. I have strategic priorities that circumvent vertical integration, sometimes being long-term, lasting relationships with outside vendors that I wish to be able to continue to have. I have great relationships with my vendors. When I say I need extra help, they give me extra help. When it comes to shipping, I get that stuff there next day. They've always been reliable. Those things mean something to you that may circumvent the need for a vertical market. Because let's just say this, when you vertically integrate, you're going to get people upset, okay? Because the dedication to the system doesn't mean you're dedicated to the people. And as I've said before, if you vertically integrate, It means that you're going to be doing all of the work that your former channel partners did, and sometimes that can fall back on you. So you have to make a conscious choice, and the conscious choice has to start with return on investment. And then realize this, you're not going to make any friends along the way. But why? Why do you do it? There's 6 reasons, good reasons, why. Move. Thank you. You outsource distribution. 6 good reasons. The first is the motivation of your channel partners. Transactional kinds of relationships do have their purpose because they're great motivators. You have positive motivation when you get money, and you have negative ones when you fear the loss of business. Your channel partners are in a hugely competitive world. Their margins are just as razor thin as yours. And you do have a certain amount of clout, no matter how small you are. And so your channel partners will be willing to not only perform in an efficient manner, but one in which it's 100% efficient. And if there's mistakes, they know they'll be called on them. Now, a channel partner, let's say a shipper, one of their great abilities is specialization. It's all they do, and there's no distractions. Do you realize how hard it must be to ship stuff up to Boone? Think about it. What routes are there coming in? Well, there's really 2 routes, if you want to say 321 and 421, but they're both climbing up hills. And you have to be more than a trucker. You got to be a pretty specialized kind of person to rumble around in these hills, especially not getting caught in situations that you may not know. Lord help the poor trucker who tries to go down Valley Crucis Road. To his bane, he's probably still there. All right. So that's the kind of specialization that I mean. They not only specialize in trucking, but in difficult conditions, and that would be an example. I hate to talk about survival of the fittest, but generally that happens in the business world. If they fail to perform their functions better than competition, then eventually, other than once again, if there's special issues that are entailed, they will eventually leave. I wish we'd give competition to the soda fountains here. I'm so sick of Pepsi products. Pepsi is one of the smartest corporations. If you have a choice between Pepsi and Coke, folks, even if you're a Coke drinker like I am, go work for Pepsi. All right, they're smart. Okay, I'm going off on the direction. Gatorade was sold in the mid-2000s to Pepsi, and Coke never put in a bid because they said they owned Powerade, which has 12% of the market. And Gatorade has 82. Why? Why not even make Pepsi forced into a high bidding situation? Make them pay extra. Anyway, so survival of the economic fittest. Economies of scale, because you can pool the demands together from several manufacturers. You can bring all of the marketing functions and the good get better. The next is a heavier market coverage. One of the most interesting things about what has happened in the last 5 or 6 years, especially with COVID and the need for home delivery, is that the delivery has gotten better, not worse. And one of those is an outtake of the situation that when you're forced under difficult conditions, somehow you find a way. And this external third party that has many, many smaller customers more frequently gets smarter about the way they do deliveries. Did you know that UPS trucks only make right turns? Yes, they have a special software that when they put in all of their deliveries, it makes sure that they do right-hand turns all day, never a left-hand turn, okay? Because it increases fuel economy by 20% and reduces the day trips by some absurd number. Mythbusters actually did one. Maybe I'll play it next one. But yeah, it absolutely is true. But that's the kind of stuff that you do when you do it every day, you get better at, okay? The last is that you have independence if you're upstream buying units from any individual manufacturer. So if I've got 3 plants that are making my things, generally the smarter thing to do is instead of having one factory that does 100% of your work, it's better to have 2 factories that are doing work at like 60%, because there's always the possibility of losing one of those factories, but the other one can take over for you. All right. So heavy reasons why you outsource, all of them worth it. So just remember that. Okay. Now, what are the things that I have that might make me decide to go vertical market? Well, the real nut that comes down to vertical markets many times can be the intangible capabilities of your particular organization. Those come under some unique idiosyncratic knowledge, some specialized understanding that's not readily deployed, or may not even be existent. I'll move on to the next slides that'll explain this more. But to go on, some of the intangible capabilities that you might have as a corporation is idiosyncratic knowledge, specialized knowledge that can't be readily deployed in another particular principle. So when the Y2K scare came up at around 1995 and 96, one of the reasons why is that incredibly, they were still using software programs that were 30 to 40 years old. Realize these programs were meant to run in small bits, 16K. Think about that when you consider the gigabyte size programs that they have now. Well, one of the ways that they scrimped was they scrimped on the date. And so they didn't use the 19 part of 68, they just used the 68. Well, there were millions of programs out there. They didn't know what to do, so guess what they started doing? They started hiring old guys like me to reprogram the systems because they're the only ones who knew how they work, okay? So that's kind of an idiosyncratic knowledge, tuning by ear. If you've ever watched somebody tune a piano by ear, it's pretty amazing to watch. It's a specialized skill, but how many ways can you deploy that? A idiosyncratic knowledge has near zero value when it is used for something else, but in that particular realm, it has infinite value. It means everything. And so that's what idiosyncratic knowledge is. The next is relationships. You know, one of the things I talked about in that relational governance is that there are personal connections that are bonding and can resist difficulties. And so if you have these connections between the personnel, they can be not only invaluable, well, you can't, it's incomparable because you have someone who is willingly invested in your future, who's working for another organization. That's a great connection to have. If I'm going to do just-in-time manufacturing, where I've got to be able to say, I want to buy 10,000 units, but I only want them 1,000 a month, I have to have some pretty good contracts, of course, but also pretty good connections too. And so relationships may be a reason. The last is the brand equity. just carrying that particular product instead of making my own is a valuation beyond gold. So any examples that you can think of, just the names itself. Apple Juice is not an authorized Apple store, but they are selling reconditioned apples because the brand name Apple is a constant. There are a lot of individual motorcycle shops that are not Harley Davidson distributors, but they are they are distributing Harley Davidson products and even working on them quite simply because the brand name is so powerful that it carries its own audience. It's one of the things when you have a franchise come into a town, it just makes an impact right away. And so these intangible capabilities are all reasons why we may decide to do something else. Customized facilities. This is part of what is physical or tangible. So does anybody know what a reefer is? You're all looking at each other. Besides the obvious, a reefer is a refrigerated train car, okay? It is a box car that is refrigerated. It fundamentally changed the United States in the 1880s and 90s when they were able to freeze goods and to move them across the United States. You had places such as California and other locations become the breadbasket of the United States because they could ship their goods all the way across country. But in order to do that, the first corporations that came along with reefer facilities were the ones that grabbed the big markets. And so this is an example of a customized physical facility. Dedicated capacity is when you basically give some portion, major portion of your business to a particular manufacturer. Now, Amazon and Federal Express have been going through this mutual divorce over the last 3 or 4 years. It all started in demands in 2021 when the Cleveland facility that Amazon was using, they demanded to, or they, yeah, I guess they did demand. They went to Federal Express and said, we need 2/3 of this facility. And Federal Express said, you're not our only customer. Granted, we're making $600 million from you, but you're not our only customer. And then finally, what has happened is exactly what you might consider is that, Amazon has started to create their own package delivery services. Here they are vertically integrating down because of some of the reasons that we're finding here. And the last is, I have problems, site specificity. Got that out. Where you need to have it in a particular location. Despite the general downturn in the cloth and the, furniture industry in North Carolina, it's still pretty strong, all right? And I've gone to a couple of facilities down towards Hickory where I've seen some enormous capacities there. And the advantages, of course, that they have by being around Hickory is you're in a 5-county area with over 300,000 people. And they flourish where others have died quite simply because they're in an ideal location. Hickory is very much a hub city, and naturally that's why we're doing some investment. And so these are intangible capabilities and tangible capabilities. And our decisions are made on the importance of whether we do make or buy, depending on whether it's something esoteric or something physical. Oops. So if we look at the economic cycles, boom to bust and back up, recession to growth, depending on the consistency of those years, we have the concept of volatility. Volatility doesn't mean that everything's bad. A volatile market is just one that simply goes up and down all the time. So a recession that lasts for a few years actually has some consistency to it and allows businesses to plan better. Interesting fact, more businesses are started in recessions than they are during recoveries, because the truth is that in recessions, people are laid off, making to their own devices. Talented people do talented things, and they go off and create new businesses, and small businesses do 3/4 of the new hiring in the United States. So sometimes recessions fuel on recoveries. So highly volatile market. What is your business? Is it a general office supply company that basically vastly produces goods that are generally bought from other corporations? That's what low specificity means, all right? It means that there's not as much uniqueness about you. You might have advantages in location, maybe in relationships, but the general goods that you make or the things or the products that you sell are generally substitutable, okay? Except you do things like you pump in service and you have dedication and those kind of things, and those are intangible, but the goods that you have, low specificity. In a highly volatile market, you will outsource your distribution to retain your flexibility. And so wherever you can, as long as there's uncertainty, what you're going to do is you're going to bank on that uncertainty. You're going to do whatever you can to have more of a transactional approach. And you're not going to necessarily, you can always keep the ideas in your mind, but you're not necessarily going to go out there and wing it. If you're very unique, you have high specificity. The thing that you do is so unique and specialized that it requires a certain level of product knowledge and sophistication to achieve it. Driving around these mountains, that's a pretty specific thing. Then if it's a highly promising market, you vertically integrate to be able to take advantage of all opportunities. You gain control over the employees that are doing what you're doing. You're able to bargain more effectively because you have a unified stance. And in changing markets, once again, as I said, recessions start more new industries than recoveries do. You gain advantage for the next recovery cycle. In a less promising market, you don't go in. It's just as simple as that, okay? You don't go into markets where you have very little chance, especially when the market is volatile. Now, there's other reasons why you vertically integrate. One of the smart things that the furniture manufacturers did, it's called dual distribution. We'll talk about that in the next chapter. But one of the reasons that you vertically integrate is to find out what's going down in the bottom of your channel system. So performance ambiguity is the uncertainty that arises when you do not know if you're performing great or you're performing bad. You know, the saying, a rising tide floats all boats. So in the recovery of 80s, you had Columbia Data Products selling PCs up to 40,000 a month, and in less than 3 years, they went out of business. How well am I doing? I'm selling, but is that great or is it bad? Am I just riding a wave, or is there something sincerely good about what we do? And performance ambiguity is the failure to have the information to understand why I'm being successful. If I can't discern my own level of importance or how well I'm doing, then I'm just being swept by. And as soon as things turn bad, so will my business. And the other part is to learn from my customer base. So one of the important things, difficult things for organizations to do, especially the ones in the 80s that succeeded, was to embrace user groups. These are the very first social media people that came along. They were users of your product. They had a brand commitment. And so if you wanted to know what was wrong, you could listen to them. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll take all of their suggestions, because not everybody is right, but you can find quite a few insights that come from your customer base. Remember, it's long-term relationships is that the things that keeps the leaky bucket of people who leave keeps the whole system afloat. So one of the great discussions, it's funny because I was actually talking to someone who worked at Luxottica. Luxottica purchased LensCrafter to gain knowledge of how to operate in the market in the United States, and it did not go as great as they wanted to. But that was the reason why they bought them. A lot of reasons why foreign companies buy American companies, quite simply, is to understand the way we do business here. And to learn. So these are reasons why to vertically integrate, okay? Other than return on investment. So the problem, once again, I've talked about is that if you integrate forward or backwards, you're into territory that you don't necessarily have a good knowledge of. And so Intermarché was a large grocery store in France that started to integrate backward into food production. Well, the problem with that is that they're not in the business of producing food, they're in the business of distributing it. Because a lot of it, oh gosh, what was the name of it? There's a very big specific kind of research flow on psychology that says the more that you know, the more you really don't know, that you've got to hit a critical period. It's almost like 10,000 hours. Well, that difficulty in the middle is the management was trying to understand the retail industry in the United States. They were basically cutting off any other kinds of other things that they were supposed to be dealing with, and it hurt their business. One of the things that did not hurt Starbucks is that Starbucks, the individuals within it, were coffee specialists. So that was part of their particular skill set. And so the warning is, you know, integration, vertical integration of your products is not always a great thing. So let me end with a few pieces that I want to make sure that you remember. Okay. Just remember, you start from the base that outsourcing is the most attractive option. Remember always you make your choices to enhance your return on investment, and most of those favor outsourcing unless you have some really unique, specific capabilities that you can exploit. Just remember also there may be environmental reasons why you simply can't. You do not have access to the resources and you must pay for them. Or that your businesses have purposes other than return on investment. And that happens. But vertical market as an advantage gives you control. Along with the responsibility and the cost, you come down to being the ultimate decider of your own success. And it can be to enormous advantages. It straps capital, it does, but it can ultimately lead to incredible successes. And what can you say about Starbucks? All right. They'll have one on every corner eventually. And to their credit, they found a way to make it successful. Okay. So just remember those things. Remember the 6 fundamental advantages of having outside specialists. Remember that long-term relationships and connections are some of the reasons why you may not, and that you have some unique ability that you can exploit that increases your return on investment. Let's go home. Y'all have a good weekend. You bet.